Hi, I'm Pastor James Richards of NHM, New Horizons Missions. I want to welcome you to this part A of Jesus' parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Now, Jesus is with his disciples on the Mount of Olives. He's looking back at the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. He had just given the amazing prophecy about the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem itself, all of which took place 40 years later in 70 AD. He had earlier been asked a question about when he will return. He answered by saying, well, no one knows when it will be. Then he tells them to be watchful by teaching them this wonderful parable. Matthew 25. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him!" All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil because of our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back, "Believe me, I don't know you." And in the last verse, "So you too must keep watch," said Jesus, "for you do not know the day or the hour of my return." So let's go through this line by line. Let's start at verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. Firstly, this is a picture of the kingdom of God on earth and what happens at the end of the age. That the kingdom of God continues into eternity. It just goes on and on for all eternity, the kingdom of God. Jesus explains there is a door into the kingdom of God. That door is always open to whoever is invited until eternity begins. Then the door is closed forever. Jesus wanted to give this teaching in a way those listening could easily understand. So he gave this parable about a wedding feast. Now, these parties happened frequently and were a huge event in the lives of the Jews of that time. Now, even today, Jewish weddings are usually massive events, as you know. So this was something that the listeners could relate to. First of all, we need to recognize the characters. The bridegroom, who was that? Well, that is Jesus the King. The bridesmaids, who do they represent? Well, they represent all the people of the world, including you and me. The bridegroom arriving is Jesus returning at the end of the age, the judgment, and the beginning of the eternal marriage feast of Christ and his people, the true church, as pictured in Revelation 21:2. Do you remember that? "And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband." That's what it says. They call them lamps in this verse, but I think they're what we would call torches. You know, they were would wrap old rags around a bundle of sticks. They would soak it in olive oil and then light it. They would carry spare oil in a little pot so that as the oil dried out on the torches, they could replenish these torches. They would then march in with a bride and bridegroom in a grand wedding procession. If it occurred at night, they would have those torches blazing. It would be quite a sight, seeing them all march in with their torches blazing. Now we have been invited to accompany the King of Kings on his triumphal wedding procession. Like the bridesmaids, we need to be ready. Why would anyone not be ready? Let me ask you, are you ready? Now, verse 2, 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. Now, 5 and 5 are just symbolic numbers. It doesn't mean that half of all people will be saved. Unfortunately, I think it's a lot less. Verse 3, the 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. Jesus uses the illustration that the foolish ones were just not prepared. They knew this event was to take place, but they didn't do what they needed to do to take part in the marriage ceremony. You can see the point that Jesus is driving home here. Everyone has a basic knowledge that there is a God and can decide to either be prepared or not. Paul tells us that God will not accept any excuses on Judgment Day. Romans 1:19 through 21 tell us, they know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. I think we all know people like that, don't we? Unfortunately, we know that Paul here is referring to other religions, to atheists, to agnostics, even nominal Christians who have a different view about God and Jesus than true born-again believers. Verse 5, when the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. Now that's the end of part 1 of this wonderful parable from Jesus about the 10 bridesmaids. Make sure you listen to part B, in which Jesus will explain what happens to 5 who are wise and the 5 who are foolish. Thank you.